Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Week 6 FanDuel lineup review presented by Occupy Fantasy. This is Brian Jester, co-founder at Occupy Fantasy, and we're going to take a look at one of my personal FanDuel lineups from this past weekend, talk about the plays I made, why I played them, and which types of contests I entered this lineup into. Let's start with the quarterback position, Kirk Cousins. He was a top 5 player in our model. We wrote about him in the Daily Plug, and at a similar price point to Deshaun Watson, we thought he had similar upside, similar floor, but at a little bit lower ownership. And you'll see here, 14.3% as he was in this contest. And we talked about how you didn't have to stack him with any of his receivers because of A, his rushing upside, and he actually coincidentally ran for a touchdown in this game, and B, the wide distribution of targets in Washington. It's kind of tough to pick who to stack with him every week, especially when you're playing a lower risk, high floor, high upside type of lineup, which is what we want to do here. And so we didn't stack anyone with Kirk Cousins. You'll see at receiver, we played our top receiver, Antonio Brown. He was number 1 in the model. He was just 14.3% owned. We expected him to be 15 to 20% owned. So that was right in line. DeAndre Hopkins, we knew would be the highest owned receiver probably on the board, 21.4%. He was a top 5 play in our model. Wanted to get exposure to the Houston passing game if we could, if we didn't go with Deshaun Watson. And at the third receiver spot, Kenny Stills, who was our number 2 value play. We talked about him in the Daily Plug, how he was going to see an increase in targets with Devontae Parker out of the lineup. And I was fortunate enough for him to get into the end zone and hit 3 times value here. So those are the receivers. Going to tight end, Austin Hooper, we talked about him in the Daily Plug. In fact, all the players here were talked about in our Daily Plug and how to construct them into one lineup. And Austin Hooper with Mohamed Sanu out, who was averaging 6 targets a game, we knew that there would be more targets flowing towards Austin Hooper in this matchup. And in this lineup, particularly after I already inserted Kenny Stills, Austin Hooper was a great correlated play, opposite receiver, although Hooper is a tight end. And so that added some upside to this lineup as well. Didn't perform great, just missed 2x value, which is what we're looking for on FanDuel, but still happy with the play at just 4,800. Going back up to running back, Kareem Hunt was our top play in the Occupy model. He was a huge disappointment. Kansas City could not hold on to the ball. The time of possession was huge in favor of Pittsburgh. However, still would play him every time in this spot. And even though he's 9,300, has a major floor in one of the worst possible game scripts, worst possible games he could possibly play, he still ended up with 13.5 FanDuel points, which is what you're really looking for when you're paying that kind of price. The other running back I went with was Mark Ingram, who was our top value play. Talked about him in the model with Adrian Peterson gone and how big of an upside he would have, how much of a floor he would have with his increased share in that backfield. And he ended up with 30 touches in this game, got into the end zone twice. Just 21% owned. We projected 15 to 19% in the Occupy model, so pretty much right in line with what we were expecting. So at 5,900, great value. Would play him many times in this spot. Going down to kicker and defense, we had 2 kickers in mind for this slate, Will Lutz and Dustin Hopkins. And because I had Kirk Cousins in my lineup, I wanted to increase the upside and not go with a kicker from the same team. So I went with Will Lutz of the Saints, and he ended up with a million extra points in that crazy game down in New Orleans. And Denver, while they underperformed, was still our top play in the model by a pretty wide margin. All this fit in pretty nicely. Now, after this lineup was created, I took a look at the ownership, right? Or at least our projected ownership in our model. And these actual numbers were right in line with what we expected. And so once I looked at it, I would have pretty much high-owned guys at every position except 2 low-owned guys here in Kenny Stills and Austin Hooper. We projected them to be under 5% owned, at least under 10% owned, and they were in this contest 7.1%. And because we had the high floor, the high ownership, but a couple guys to differentiate, I could enter this lineup into lower risk contests, so I entered it into a bunch of 50-50s and double ups. But I also entered it into some higher risk contests, some quintuple ups, some 100-player leagues. In this contest particularly, the 14-player satellite for the World Online Championship on FanDuel, the top 2 out of 14 cashed. Fortunate enough to get first in this contest and get a ticket to the Super Satellite here in a few weeks. So projected ownership is very important. It's one of the biggest benefits of our Occupy model. And once again, all these plays were from the Daily Plug, which is where you can get at occupyfantasy.com. Follow us on Twitter at Occupy Fantasy. I'm Brian Jester. Good luck this week.